of opting in, of participation in a community by choice, and how appropriate then that Israel was a nation which was given a charter by the entire United Nations, right? That this is the same way that everybody sort of agreed, yes, you can have a state, that this is the same kind of individual participation in the whole that Israel is comprised of, so too is the United Nations, right? That the choosing to be unified, even though there's nothing compelling us to. This is the great triumph of the human spirit, of the individual looking towards the larger community for a sense of fulfillment, of a desire to give to the whole. And that each individual comes and I want to give. I'm not looking to piggyback, to be taken care of, but I want to participate with a volunteering spirit, a generosity of spirit, and that makes community an incubator for individual growth. That the people who choose to be part of a whole, all of their strengths are magnified because they're shared. That a person with a talent who sits at home by themselves, that talent goes unappreciated, and it sort of is like is never given the opportunity to flourish and to nourish the community. But people who are choosing to participate in community want to have their gifts, they want to share their gift, right? Not to hoard it, but to share it. And so this, for him, was an example of how Israeli Independence Day is an example for the entire world, of what community can be. And I thought that was remarkable, that he was able to make something so parochial and so individualized into a universal message of world unity. And I think that that's very typical of him, that this is something which is so deeply personal and individual and touches us each in our life, of our choice to participate in community. And yet that is something which goes all the way to the top of an international organization, and it will influence the way we as a human community conceive of ourselves as one whole. The giant of spirit that he was can still be an inspiration for us in our individual community, right? Our micro communities of our families, and our larger communities, and ultimately the largest of communities, the people of Earth. That we should all manifest this generosity of spirit of which he was such a shining model, to share our gifts, to work on ourselves so that we can benefit the whole in the most complete way. There is no greater tribute, I think, than we can pay to Rabbi Sacks than to live his teachings, than to choose to participate, to offer what we can share, to offer our gifts, not for our own gain, but for the gain of the world, to participate in community with a desire to enhance the life of others, and that's this choice to give can be something that we celebrate and recognize in one another. It's a pity, that we don't have this kind of universal leadership emerging right now. We're left much like Moses, our teacher, designated Joshua, and we're now without a Joshua even. We don't know to whom to turn for this kind of inspirational and unifying leadership. And all the more so that if we can each rise to be a little Joshua and to carry Rabbi Sacks' message forward and pass it on to the next generation, we will be doing him justice. I believe we have another video to share. Gavri, can you put that on?
Yes, I'm just going to put it up. Thank you, Rabbi Schechter. The Talmud in Becharot says something which is often used, but I think it's got a different dimension in today's day and age with modern technology. The Talmud says the following: Kol Talmid Chacham, any Torah scholar, שאומרים דבר שמועה מפיו בעולם הזה, that one says over their teachings in this world after they've passed away, שפתותיו דובבות בקבר. Their lips are almost literally moving within the grave, which is a euphemism for, what we generally understand, that when we teach or say over teachings of a rabbi who's passed away, then his legacy continues to live on. But thanks to today's modern technology, we have the opportunity to literally hear Rabbi Sacks in his own words, teach us what his idea of a community is.
Speaking of thinking locally or the particularity, what does it mean to be part of a community nowadays? On the Jewish end, you can think of a person whose closest rabbinic teacher lives in Israel, whose friends live on either the East Coast or the West Coast. You may live in the Midwest. So can we still speak of a local Jewish community, or in the broader general sense? You may think of a person in the world of tomorrow or in the world of today, whose employer is working remotely from Spain, whose colleagues don't even live anywhere. They switch Airbnbs every 6 months, and who communicates with their best friends primarily over Skype or over FaceTime. So what in the world of today is the advantage, or is it even possible to think locally? What is local community?
A local community is actually dealt with for that in Psalm number 1. To be strong, you need roots somewhere. Whereas the Rishaim, we won't call them wicked, we'll call them just alienated or destabilized, are like chaff blown on the winds. And that's what Facebook culture actually is. Whatever is this week's fashion or this week's viral video. I mean, you don't have grinning cats on, do you? I mean, or whatever it is this week. I don't know. This is kamotza shetit venerah. This is being blown this way and that. That is not an identity. So here it is. In 2011, a British medical charity, Macmillan Nurses, did a survey of young Brits between the ages of 18 and 30. This is 2011, 6 years ago, which in the history of Facebook is quite something, because Facebook just had its bar mitzvah. It's been around for 13 years. It has 2 billion subscribers. So 6 years ago, it was, still in Cheder, And they asked, how many Facebook friends do you have? And the average answer 6 years ago was 237. When asked, how many of those can you rely on in an emergency, the average answer was 2. A quarter said 1 and 8 said none. That is the difference between a Facebook friend and a real friend. The guy you sit next to in shul, or even better, the guy you don't speak to in shul. But so I was doing a Facebook Live a week or two ago with the head of Facebook in Europe, Nicola Mendelsohn, who I have to tell you is an Orthodox and practicing Jew. And we were talking just that because Mark Zuckerberg has changed the mission statement of Facebook to supporting communities. And the truth is, yes, Facebook can support communities, but it can't create communities. Communities have to be down here on the ground. That's why you need a minyan. That's why you don't drive on Shabbos, so Orthodox Jews live in close proximity to one another. You need those things. And you need face-to-face encounters. And therefore, we came up with this wonderful idea of a digital detox. You know what I mean? In order not to be totally dependent on your smartphone. And my smartphone is a lot smarter than I am. So I've already got an inferiority complex. And I haven't even bought the iPhone X yet. So I mean, I should be completely inadequate then. But the point is, the fact is that one day a week, you've got to switch off the iPhone and meet real people in real time and real space. And I propose, let's call it Shabbos. So, and I think Mark Zuckerberg, and bless him, Mark and Sheryl Sandberg, both this Yom Kippur came out of the closet and sent a Yom Kippur message, Chatasi Avisi Poshati, to which everyone said, "You're absolutely right, you really did." And so here it is. All these technologies can support community, but they can't create and sustain community. And for that, you need physical presence, I vow, and there's no substitute for it.
As we wrap up tonight's program, I want to thank again, first of all, Rabbi Schachter for his presentation and Gavi for making this happen. And I also want to thank...
Chief Rabbi, ladies and gentlemen.
Second.
I must say I was profoundly touched and flattered that you should have thought of inviting me to join you here this evening to mark your distinguished tenure as Chief Rabbi.
As we resolve the technical difficulties, just also want to acknowledge the wonderful community that we have here. I'm a relative newcomer here, but to see so many people logging on, people that I do see regularly in person, it's a wonderful thing. And as Rabbi Sacks was saying, you can't fake the real thing. You can't produce community out of nowhere. So as challenging as the COVID time has been for everyone, I personally feel a tremendous warm welcome into this community, and it speaks to me the strength of the community, of the roots and the interconnected roots of this community, that people come and want to participate in virtual and in live programming, and the warmth and care that we've received here is tremendous. So I want to give a general pat on the back to the Vancouver Jewish community for being warm and welcoming and a joy to be part of.
Thank you, Rabbi Schachter. So sorry about the technical snag over there. I also want to thank, I don't know if it cut out when I said it before, Gavi for really pushing this forward, and also the office of Chief Rabbi Sacks for creating this event where there's hundreds of communities around the world who tonight, last night, and this whole week will be commemorating the legacy of Rabbi Sacks, and the learning will be done in his memory. So the office has actually sent us a short message from his daughter, Gila, who gave a eulogy at his funeral. And I should mention that his funeral was in the midst of COVID, really at the beginning of COVID, and they had literally 10 men and the close family members, obviously. But even the chief rabbi, his successor, Chief Rabbi Movis, wasn't able to attend. It happened to be he was in quarantine at the time. He actually sent a letter to be read at the funeral. But it was, if I may say, almost pitiful. What a giant of a man should have such a funeral. But I think that God works in wondrous ways. But Rabbi Sacks, as this week's parasha is called Chaye Sarah. And as a girl in Shalhevet asked me this week, why is this week's parasha called Chaye Sarah, the life of Sarah? And it starts talking about the death of Sarah. Seemingly, this week's parasha, maybe a bit more of a gory name, should be called Mot Sarah, the death of Sarah. And one of the answers given is Chaye Sarah because her whole, although she passed away and left the void, but her life, her legacy continued. And her life was literally, her death almost was not felt in that sense. Her death was, a vacuum which was left because the physical being was no longer in this world. But her teachings and her legacy through her child, and then later through her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, until us today, all of us who are here and not here, listening to this Zoom together. That is her true legacy. And I think the same is true about Rabbi Sacks. He perhaps didn't have a very big funeral, which was befitting to him. However, his legacy is still around because he is so still alive. And I want to thank the Office of Rabbi Sacks for sharing with us this message, which I'll share on the screen now.
Perhaps the most defining feature of my father's life, one that I don't think I fully appreciated until after he died, was that he learned and continued to learn every single day until his last. He learned from books, from text, from laws, he learned from history and from world events, but mainly he learned from people. He would seek out people to learn from every possible path of life, and he would seek out what he could learn from everyone he met. And he would do this through conversation, through talking and listening. So for him, conversation was a defining and spiritual act, a way of opening ourselves up to something beyond ourselves, of being challenged, the only way we could really become more than we were before, a training perhaps for opening ourselves up to God. In this coming week's parasha, Chayei Sarah, we read that before meeting his future wife for the first time, Yitzchak had gone out in the field before evening to meditate. The Talmud in Brachot, commenting on the choice of the word lasuach, usually meaning to talk or to converse, states, Ein sicha ela tefillah, there is no conversation without prayer. Or as my father explains it, conversation is a form of prayer. He writes on this parasha, conversation is a prayer, for in true conversation, I open myself up to the reality of another person. I enter his or her world. I begin to see things from a perspective not my own. A genuine human conversation is a preparation for and a microcosmic version of the act of prayer. Prayer, the prayer model by Yitzchak specifically, is not monologue, but dialogue. Prayer as sicha, conversation. So it is fitting that through this initiative, communities in conversation, all over the world, individuals, communities, and organizations will mark my father's yarhzeit, not simply from learning from what he wrote, but through conversation, coming together, asking, challenging, listening, and learning from each other. It means more than I can say to us, his family, that you are helping to carry forward his teaching in this beautiful way. He wrote of Moshe's death at the end of the Torah, we will not complete the journey. Therefore, we each must inspire others to continue what we began. Thank you for continuing the work my father began. And may the work he began be a blessing for all of us.
Yehi Zichro Baruch, may his memory be for a blessing, and may we, as the community in Vancouver, strengthen ourselves to strengthen others, to be for a blessing for his memory. Tehei Nishmato.
I'm speaking to you from New York.
The prince always has to be the center of attention. Hey, Rabbi, it's Amen.
Clearly. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you, rabbis. Yashar koach. Yashar koach.